Hey everyone, welcome back to the Angular mini project series, where we take real world ideas and turn them into smart reactive apps using ngrx and RxJs. Today we are building a complete node taking application which will be powered by ngrx for state management and RxJs for some reactive magic. We will cover everything from setting up ngrx to implementing add, edit and our delete functionality. We will also add a simple search filter and will make sure our nodes persist even after we close the browser, for which we will be making use of our ngrx state storage. So this video is packed with all the practical skills you need for modern Angular development. We will try to keep the video concise, so don't worry, it won't be a long video. So are you ready to become an ngrx legend? So let's get started. So first things first, let's generate a new Angular project. So we'll open our terminal here, and inside this we'll run the command ngnew and our project name. So I'll say ngnew and I want to call my project Angular ngrx nodes app. Okay, so we'll create a nodes application, so I'll say nodes app, and once we do this it will ask us if we want a routing. So for this I do not want a routing, so I'll say no, and I want to go with CSS. And now this will create our Angular project, our nodes application. Okay, so it will take some time depending on our internet speed, and it will install all the npm packages and set up our project. Okay, great. So all the packages have been installed successfully and our Angular project has been created. So we can open our Angular project in our VS Code. Okay, so I've opened the Visual Studio Code and I will take this folder which we created, which is Angular ngrx nodes app, and drag it here. Now this will open the project, okay, as you can see, and we'll expand this. Okay, so we will open our terminal and here we will run our commands to install our store effects and DevTools. So I'll run these commands here, which is ng-add, ngrx-store effects and DevTools. Okay, once we press enter, they will use and install all of the latest packages from here. So we'll click Y, and then you can see that all of the packages are installing. So that's it, we have all the 3 packages installed successfully using ng-add command. Now let's think about our state. What do we actually need to manage? Nodes, right? We need to manage our nodes. So let's define the structure for a single node and our feature state. Okay, so we will create a new folder inside our src app here. Okay, inside this we will create a folder and we'll call it nodes. So I'll call it nodes here, and inside this I'll create a file and I'll call it node.model.ts. So inside this we can define the structure of our single node. Okay, so what will our node have? So it will be interface, so we'll say export interface. Okay, and we will call it like node. Okay, and what will our node have actually? So it will have like a ID, right, for identification. So ID would be of type string, and we'll make sure it's a unique ID. Okay, and our node object will also have a title, right? So what our node is trying to say, so that will be of type string. And after that obviously our node will have some content, so content would be of type string too. So that's it, we have successfully defined our node model. That is how our node should look like. Okay, simple enough, right? So now let's define our actions. So what are actions? These are events that can happen in our application, obviously related to these nodes. So inside our this nodes folder we will create a new file and we will call it node.actions.ts. okay, and inside this we will have all of our different actions, like adding a node, updating a node, deleting node, loading the nodes. So we will start with our add node. Okay, so we'll say export constant add node. Whenever user wants to add a node, we will dispatch this action. So we'll say create action, and create actions come from ngrx-store. Okay, so we'll say create action. As you can see, it's come from ngrx-store here. And inside this what we will do is, so this takes a type string. Okay, so we'll follow this type string because this is easier for debugging. Okay, and we'll pass a data. So for this we will say what it is for, like nodes, right, and what it does. So it does like adding a node, so we'll say add node. And now if we want to pass a data, we can pass. This is an optional thing. In our case, every time we add a node we need to pass that node, right? So I'll say it should be node. Okay, and of type. So here we'll pass the object, so it will be a node, okay, node property, which will be of type. Either we can put it as any or something, but I already defined the interface here, the model node, so it needs to be of type node here, okay, like this. You can see. Now after this we need to put it like this, and that's it. We just need to import our interface here, so we will import it, and we also need to import our props here, okay. Once we do this, our errors are gone, and we have successfully created our first action, which is for adding our node, okay, this one. So it uses our basic create action, and we have our string attached here, which is nodes. It tells us what it does, which is adding a node, and we pass the payload, which is node, okay, which is of type node. Like this we will create to update our node, delete, load, and our load node success. So I'll just copy this here, okay, and I'll paste it, and then we can do all the changes. So this one would be update node, and here we will say update node, this one. So when we are updating a node, we will change this, okay, here, and what we need to pass is we need to pass the update property here. And update, what it will do is it will take a ID, okay, the ID will be of type string, and to update we also need to pass the changes, right? For example, if we're changing title or our content, so we will pass that. So for that we will use partial here, because we want to pass like some part of the node, and here we will pass, it will be of type node. So once we do, you see that again our errors are gone. So for update we are passing our ID, and we are passing some partial node data, okay. Now next is our delete node. So this is the easy one, so we'll say delete node, okay, and for delete we will again write here delete, and for to delete we just need to pass our ID, okay. So we will say here ID, which is of type string, so ID of type string, and this is also done. Now we have two more, but one is to load our nodes, so we'll say load nodes, okay, and in this one we will say here load node, okay, nodes. And for loading, basically we do not need to pass any props, so we'll just remove it here, okay, all of this like this. So we're not passing anything because this is for our initial load, okay. Whenever we load the data, we just need to pass this action, and based on that we'll get the state. So we don't not need to pass anything here because we are getting mostly, okay. Now we need to load node success. So whenever we get a success action, okay, so we need to, that time we will actually update our UI. So we'll need load node success here, okay. So load node success, and here we'll say load node and success here at the end. So these all strings are really useful whenever we are debugging and we need to find where actually there is a problem in our application. So we'll be able to track it down easily. And here we will get an array of not array, okay. So node, basically these will be nodes, and it will be of type node array, okay. So that's it. We have successfully defined all of our 5 actions here, which is adding, updating, deleting, load, and load node success. Great. So that's it for our node actions. Now comes the reducer. So inside the nodes we'll create our new file, and we'll call it node.reducer.ts, okay. So what are reducers? So the reducers, they are pure functions which takes the current state and an action, and it returns us with a new state. So in the reducer we will also define our feature state, okay. So what we will do is we will say export constant, and we will say nodes feature key. So this key is basically the slice of our state which we will use, okay, and we will call it nodes here. So we have defined our feature state here, okay, so this one, nodes. Now this is what we will use anytime we want to get our node state. So now for our node state we need to define our interface. So we'll say export interface, and we will have like nodes state, okay. So we're talking about whole nodes now, okay. So node state, and this will be interface. So here we will have our nodes, okay, which will be of type node array, okay, like this. And also we will have 2 more variables here. So one to keep track of our loading state, and another to keep track of any errors we can receive. So we will have loading, okay, which will be boolean, so of type boolean, and another would be error. And so whenever we are loading our nodes, etc., we can also have error, right? So to track those, we'll have this error property, which will be either string or null, like this. So after this we can define our initial state, and this is really crucial because our create reducer function will take on this initial state. So we'll say here export constant initial state. Okay, you can name it initial node state or anything like that. I'll say it initial state, which will be coming from our this node state. Okay, it would be of type this. So I'll also make it like capital case, so I'll say node state here. Okay, looks better. And I'll say initial state. Okay, this will be of type node state, which we defined, and here we can define whatever values we want. So nodes, so our nodes would be like an empty array in the beginning. Okay, and our loading would be false, right? Because in the initial we are not loading anything, so it's false, and error would be null. So we'll say it null. That's it. So we have defined our initial state. Now we can define our most important stuff, which is our reducer. So we'll say export constant our node reducer. Okay, so node reducer, and as you know, reducer comes from create reducer function. So we'll say create reducer, and inside this we will first write our initial state. So we'll say initial state, so it takes the initial state, then depending on our action we can return different state. Okay, so here we will have on, and we need to import this on as well from our ngrx-store. Okay, so now we have imported this, and now inside this we can have different actions. So for that I will import all my actions, okay, as node actions. So I'll say here import star as node actions. Okay, so like this from our nodes/node actions. Great. So now we have got node action. So on different action we can tell our reducer whatever to do with our state. Okay, so on our node actions dot add node. Okay, so whenever this action is called, at that time we want to take our state. Okay, and we take the payload it has sent. So in this case we have the payload as node, right? Whenever we add a node, so we have state and we have our node, and after this here we'll open our arrow bracket. Okay, inside this here we will return object. So here we will say dot dot dot, we'll iterate over our state, and we will return our nodes object. So here nodes, we will take these nodes, we'll say dot 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 state dot nodes. Okay, so this is the one we have, and we want to add the node which we are passing to it. So that's it. So what it does is here, so here we return a new state object and we modify our array immutably. Okay, so like this we are gonna do it for our other actions as well, like our update node, delete node, load node, and load node success. So here I will take this, after this I'll put a comma. Okay, after this we will write our on update. So it would be same like this. So we'll say node actions dot on update. So whenever this action is called, we want to take the state and update the value. So we'll take the state here, and for this action you remember we also take a update object as well, which have our ID and our partial changes. So we'll take update like this, open the arrow bracket like this, and inside this we will take our previous state first like this, and then we will update our state immutably. So for that we will take our nodes here. Okay, and we will say state dot nodes, and we want to loop through it, so we'll use our map, and inside that we will go over each node, and here we will say the node which matches the ID. So we'll say node dot ID, okay, which is equals to the ID which we are passing. So we have it inside the update. So update dot ID. So if these are equal, in that case only we want to change our node, otherwise we don't want to, right? So we'll take the node and we will change the properties. So for that we will say here update dot changes, but if it is not the case, then we will just return our node, right? So like this. So as you can see here, if we go to this action, in the update node we pass our update property which has the ID and which has changes. So what we have done is we have taken those changes which pass from our action and we update it here, okay, to that specific node, only if the ID matches the specific ID, okay, the one which we are passing. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so after this we'll have our on delete. So for that we'll say on node actions dot delete node, and same stuff again. So I'll just copy paste from here. So we'll take the state like this, and only thing we need to change is this time we are deleting, right? So we also passed here id, as you remember from our actions. For delete we passed the id, so we just need to match the id and we need to filter it out. So for that we'll take our nodes and we'll say state dot nodes dot filter, and what we want to do is we want to take each node from the filter. So and we want to see if node dot id, if this is not equals to our id which we are passing. So that's it. So return all the nodes where the id is not equals to the id we are passing, so it will remove the id, right, the one we want to delete. So that's it. So it will filter out, and this should be our solution. So it will be 2 equals here. That's it. So like this we will have for our on load nodes. So for that we will have here on node actions dot load node. So whenever our component is loaded we'll call this. Okay, so for this one we will also take our state, and as we are loading the node we do not need to pass anything here. There will be no payload, as you remember in our action 2 we didn't had anything. So for that we will say again take our state, and then we do not want to change anything. Only thing we want to change is our loading property, because at this point we are loading, right, because it's loading the node. So we will set it as true like this. And after this we'll have our on load node success. So when our loads are actually success, so for that we will have node actions dot load node success. So then again we will take our state. Okay, so whenever we are getting a success, at that time we will be getting the nodes, right, which has come as, like, for example from a backend or something, that or a HTTP request that we've got a success, and it will have the nodes which comes from the request. So we'll have our state here and we will have our nodes. So the nodes, okay, and you can see we are passing the nodes as well here, array of nodes. So we will have our nodes here, and then here we will open our arrow bracket, and inside this again same stuff, iterate our state, and then this time for nodes we will pass these nodes which we receive. Okay, and loading we will set as false, because at this point we have loaded. So we'll say loading as false. Easy. If great, so we are done with our reducers now. So now next step is how do we get this data out of the store, right, in our component. So whenever we are loading the data or we make some changes, how do we get this data from our store to our component? So for that we will be using our selectors. So what are selectors? So think of selectors as a memorize function which will only recalculate if the relevant part of a state change. So example, if some state change, then only they will calculate the state and give us the data. Okay, so we'll create a new file inside our nodes. We'll create a file called selectors. So we'll say node dot selector dot ts, selectors dot ts. Okay, so here we will import our feature slice using our key which we created, this key nodes, right, so that our selector knows what we are talking about. So for that we will have our export constant and we'll have our select nodes. So we'll call it select node state. Okay, and for that we will use our create selector method here. So create selector, and inside create selector what we need to do is first we need to import our reducer. So we'll say import strings as from nodes. Okay, so here we will say from nodes dot, this will be node state. Okay, and here we will have our key from nodes dot nodes feature key. Okay, so this key which we created, nodes. Okay, so and this is a create feature selector, so I just need to have here create feature selector here. Okay, so yeah, so that solves our error. And now after this we need to select specific part of the feature state which we want. So for that we will have our export constant. So what do we need? First thing is when our application load we need to select all the nodes, right, or create selector, like how we have create reducer. So we'll have create selector here, and inside this we need to have our base state which is our select node state. And then what we will do is we will take some part of the state. So we'll take state which will be basically from nodes dot node state, and here we will say state dot what do we want to get. We want to get the nodes. Okay, so whenever this selector is called we will get our state dot nodes. So like this we will have different selectors. So here we are going to get the nodes array. Okay, nodes array, then below we'll have more state selectors like this, where we can get different parts of our state. So we wanna say that if our nodes are loading or not. So we will have select nodes loading. Okay, so we'll create another selector. Again, same stuff, create selector, and again we will have our select all node state, basically select node state, this one. And here we will take the state, which will be again from nodes dot node state. So this is a basic thing we do. And here what we'll do is whatever we want to return. So here we want to get our loading, so state dot loading. So select nodes loading, so it will return us. Okay, so first things first, we need to install our forms module and our common module. So I will put it here. So we have forms module and common module. Now we need to import it after our router outlet here. So we will put here our forms module, okay, and our common module. Okay, so we need to also import our actions and our selectors. So I'll import here. So now we have access to both of our actions and our selectors. Now inside our component here, we will implement our onInit, okay? And for that we will also declare our ngOnInit method, okay? That's it, like this. Now we need to declare our constructor here. So we'll define our constructor, and inside the constructor we will import our store. So we'll say private store, which will be of type store, okay? So this one, ngrx-store. And now inside this we can load our nodes. So to load our nodes, we need to have a nodes observable, right? So we need to create that property. So here we will have all the properties we need. So first of them is our nodes. So we'll say all nodes dollar, like this observable, and this will be basically a observable, and it will be of type nodes array. So I'll say node array, right, like this. And this will give us error, and that's it, it's all. Now inside the constructor, whenever our constructor loads, we need to have our all nodes filled with the nodes, right? So for that we will use our selector. So we'll say this dot all nodes. So this will be this dot store dot select, and now we will use our node selector, so one which we imported. So node selector dot, to get all the nodes, we'll select all nodes, easy. Like this we'll also have for our loading. So we want to let the user only show the nodes when our loading is done. So for that we will create a loading observable, is loading. So is loading observable, and this will be also observable, and but this one is gonna say true or false. So for that we'll have a boolean. So this will be of type boolean, and that's it. Again this will be like indefinite, like this. Now to fill up this also we'll use our selector. So we'll say this dot is loading, this will be also this dot store dot select. So this is really easy. You see, once we have done all the boilerplate code, we can directly use and get the state. So to get our loading, we to select nodes loading, right? So this will give us the boolean value true or false. Great. So now we can define our methods, which is to add, update, and delete our nodes. So for that, inside here, after ngOnInit here, so we'll define first our add or update node method, okay? So add or update node, okay? So this method here, and then we will have our delete node method. So we'll say delete node, okay? And of course we will have our edit node method too. So edit node method as well. And this method here, it will take our node, right, which will be of type node, okay? So that's it. We have created all of our method, and delete node, it will take id, which will be of type string. So that's it. So now we will start with our add or update node method, okay? So whenever we add a node, we have three properties as we mentioned in our node. One is our title, our content, and the id is we will generate it. So going back to our component, we need to create these local properties here. So for that we will have here our node title property. So we'll say node title, this will be of type string, and in the beginning we'll give it like a empty value. And also we'll have our node content property. So we'll say node content, again of type string, will be empty. And we will need one more property, which is to let user know if they want to edit the node or they want to add a node, right? So for that we will create a property. We'll say editing node id, and this will be of type string or null, depending if user is editing it or not. Okay, we initialize it as null here now. Now if we go back to our method, it will all make sense. Okay, so as you can see, we have one method for both our adding and updating the node whenever user has written something. Okay, so inside this method, first we will check if the user has not written anything and is trying to add or update a node. So for that we will say here if not, and inside this we will have, so if both of them are basically empty, then we will return and say user that they cannot be empty. So it's a user friendly feedback we are giving. But if this is not the case, which means if user is editing the node, right? So which means this value should not be a null, it should be filled up, our editing node ID. So if our editing node ID exists, in that case we will update our existing node, okay? Because a new node would not have a node ID. I hope that makes sense. So in this case where we are basically updating existing node because node ID exists, so what we will do is we will have our constant update, the update variable. You remember the action we have for our update, right? Where we give this update property with the ID and changes. So for that we will send here. So we'll say constant update equals to object. We'll send the ID and ID will be our this node ID. So editing node ID, and we need to send our changes. So our changes would be object where we'll have a title, and the title would be current title, so that will be this dot node title, and our description we need to send, so content would be this dot node content. Okay, so after this what we will do, we'll pass a action with this update option, which is this one, so this update, and then it will go to reducer and then save the state, and then we can get those data. Okay, so after this here I will say this dot store dot dispatch, and we can pass this update object, okay, inside this. So we'll call our note action, so note actions dot our update note, this one, and with this you remember we pass our prop, which is the payload, our update. So we can just pass here inside this directly update. That's it. So that's it, we have successfully written our update logic. Now if this is not the case, like if our node ID doesn't exist, it means user is trying to add a new node, right? So for that here we will have a else, and this time we will try to create a new node object. So we will say constant new node, okay, and obviously this should be of type node. So we'll have the ID property, and it should be a ID, right? Like any ID we need. So we will write a method which will generate a unique ID for this. Then we will have a title, and title would be our current node title, which we get from HTML. So this dot node title, okay, and we will have our content. So our content would be this dot node content, like this. Okay, so now one thing which is left is we need to have a unique ID every time we add a node. So for that we will use npm to install UUID, which will help us to create unique ID for each of our node. So we'll say npm install UUID, and this will install UUID from npm. Okay, so now we can directly import it here, our UUID. So we will say here import v4 as UUID v4. Okay, now we will copy it, and then we can just put it here inside our ID like this. So now what this will do is it will create an ID every time using this npm library, and we'll have a unique ID for each of our node. Okay, so after this we have created the object. We need to dispatch this object in our action. So we'll say this dot store dot dispatch. So this time we are adding an object, so we need to dispatch our add action. So we'll say node actions, okay, dot add node, and you remember add node we have the prop where we pass only our node. So we will open our object here, the node property, we will pass this new node we created. So we'll say here new node. So that's it, we have actually completed our add or update node method, where we are dispatching our update action and also our add action. So you see how we have used the if and else to write one single piece of code and not repeat ourselves again and again. Okay, now after this we have the edit node method. What this method will do is it will populate the form with all the details of the node that needs to be edited, right? Like to get at this stage. So for that I will do here, first I'll give this dot editing node ID, I will give it as the node ID. So we need to fill it, right? So whenever user clicks on edit node, it will take the node ID of that specific node and give it to this variable. After this we need to give the content as well. So we'll say this dot node title. Okay, we'll give it this node dot title. In same way we will give our node content too. So this dot node content, this would be equals to our node dot content. Okay, so now we are done with this bit. Now our delete node. Okay, so this is pretty easy. We just have to dispatch our delete action here. So we'll say this dot store dot dispatch and note actions. So we'll say here note actions dot delete note, and we just need to pass our ID as a string. So we'll just pass it directly like this. So now we are done, but we don't wanna, we want to show user a confirmation before, because it's a big action like you're deleting a node. So we will say here if, and we will show them a message. So once they click on this, then only we want to dispatch this action. So it's just a basic condition we are putting, additional check before they take this action. Okay, and at any time if user want to cancel whatever they are editing, so we'll have a cancel edit method where we will just reset our form. So we'll say this dot reset form. So we will create a reset form, and what that method will do is it will reset all the fields we need. Okay, so inside this we will have our this dot editing note ID, and we'll make it as null because at that point user is not selecting anything or something like that. Our node title should be empty string, so should be our content. So we will say this dot node content, and this should be empty like this. So we're just making some fields, every time we want to reset the form we are just writing it here, and we can call this in cancel edit. So this will all make sense when we write our HTML. Okay, so now we'll go in our HTML and we will start writing our template code so we can display our nodes. Great. So we will have a div here, and inside the div we can have a UL. Okay, and where we'll display each of our list items, so they will be our nodes. Okay, so here we'll have a ng for loop, and we will loop over all of our nodes. So for that we will go over nodes, we'll use the async pipe like this, and we will say it should be let node of nodes. Now we can display our node title, description, and other stuff here. So with this we will display all of our node title and node content inside a div. Okay, like this. Now with each of our node we need to show user that they can edit and they can delete the node, right? So after this div we'll have another div, and here we will have two buttons. So one button would be for our editing, another button should be for our delete, and both of the buttons should have a click event, right? So to edit and our delete. So as you remember, we created edit node method, so we'll say edit node, and here we will pass our node, so this node which we want to edit. So see how easy it is, we just pass it like this. And for our deleting we need to pass the ID, so we'll call our click listener here, and on click we will call our delete node. So you remember delete node takes ID, right? So for that we can use our node.id. Easy. So now we have two buttons with each of our node. Okay, node object, so it will have title, content, and it will have these two buttons, so we can edit and delete those nodes. So that's pretty easy. Okay, now we can do something to make our UI more better. So here first of all we need to have a heading. So here we will have a h2, right? And this h2 will be called nodes. So we will say we are displaying our nodes here. Then what we can do is, as you can think of, there would be a lot of nodes, so it won't be easy for a user to filter out which nodes he wants to search. So what we can do is we can place a search bar here. So for that I will create an input. Okay, and this input, this would be of type text. So we are allowing user to filter the node which he wants to search. So it should say that search nodes. Okay, like this. And then we can have our ng model. So whatever user is writing in the template, we need to have some logic so we can go and figure out the node he wants to search, right? So for that here we will have our ng model as well. So we will say here ng model. Okay, and we'll connect to it to a term. So we'll say it's search term, whatever user write, like this. So we will declare this term in our TS file. As you can see, I've already done search term here. Now we need to write some logic using the search term, so it can give us a new filtered list which we can show, but we'll do that later, don't worry for now. Only thing we need to do is we need to add more additional checks here. For example, if our list is still loading, then we don't want to show user this list, right? So in that case here we will have a div, and we will say here ng if, and if our is loading is true, so is loading observable. Okay, we will use async pipe. Okay, so if this is loading is true, then we do not want to show user the nodes. So what we want to show, we want to say that loading the nodes. Okay, so wait. Great, so we have done our basic setup where we can actually load our nodes. So now we can focus on our searching the nodes. So for that we need to have, whenever user search for a node, we need to make a new list. Okay, a new nodes basically, which will be our new filtered nodes. So we need to create those. So here we already have the search term which the user is writing. We are getting it here from our ng model. Now what we need to do is inside our constructor, after this we can have this observable. So we will need to create a filtered nodes observable. So we'll say filtered nodes, okay, and this will be of type observable as our all nodes same, right? So it will be of type node array like this, and we need to put this, and our array is gone. So now we need to fill up this observable with our new filtered nodes. For that we will say here our this dot filter nodes, okay, this observable, and we need to put a $sign just so we know we are dealing with observable here. So this dot filter nodes here, so this will be coming from our all nodes observable, right? So this dot all nodes, and we want to pipe as it's observable, and here we will use our map. So inside the map we will go over our nodes. So we'll say nodes. So what we need to do here is once we get the node, we need to filter these nodes. So we need to create a method. So we'll call a method where we'll do the whole filtering, like you know how we need to show the nodes. So we'll say this dot filter nodes. So we'll create this method, and what this will do is it will take our node, right, these nodes which we are passing, and what it will do is it will take the search term. So whatever we want to search it for, so search term like this. And after this, so as we are using a async pipe here to load our nodes, what we'll do is we'll start it with an empty array. So we'll use this RxJs method which is called start with, and here we will use empty array. So what we'll do is it will emit an empty array initially, okay, to avoid our issues with our async pipe. So before our nodes are loaded every time. So this will create our new filter nodes, okay. So we just need to declare this method here. So for that we'll go and here we will declare our filter nodes method. And as you remember, it take our nodes which will be of type node array, and what it other takes is our search term. So search term of type string. So first condition we can have is if our search term doesn't exist, right, then we want to return all the nodes. So we'll say if not term, then we want to return. So we'll say return nodes, all the nodes you have. Don't do any filtering, nothing like that, okay. But then if that is not the case, we want to take this term, convert it to lowercase. So we'll say constant lower term, okay. So we'll say this term dot to lowercase, okay, like this. So now we have access to the lowercase term, which will be easy for filtering out. Then we can say return our nodes dot filter. So this is our main logic. Return nodes dot filter will go over each node, and we'll open the arrow bracket, and here we'll say node dot title. So we will also convert it to lowercase. So that is how we do filtering. So we convert it to lowercase, and we'll say dot includes our lower term, okay. So that is how we show it. Or we will do the same thing for our node dot our content as well. So here node dot content dot to lowercase if it include lower term. Okay, so with this logic, if our node dot title or our node dot content, if it has our this lower term, okay, which is basically our search term, if it has this, then it will show those nodes, okay. So I hope this makes sense. Now we can go to our HTML and redesign our template so that it fits this all filtered nodes, right? Okay, so here instead of our own nodes, now we will have our filtered nodes. Okay, so apart from this, we can have more if conditions where if the user didn't add any nodes, we can show those as well, you know, and all the other terms. So we will have like this, two more divs where we are showing that no nodes yet, add one, and we'll have one more no nodes match your search. So if this filter nodes, basically the length is 0, then we need to show this. Otherwise we show our default case, which is this one. Okay, so now we will be using this search term to display our this filtered nodes, okay. Now another thing we need to do is we need to allow user to add the nodes, right? So for that we need to have a form where user can go and add those nodes. So we will create a div here, and inside this div we will create a class and we'll call it node form. And inside this we need to have like multiple inputs, right? So first we need to tell user if they are editing a node or they are adding a new node, right? So whenever user clicks on edit, like on this button, we need to pre-fill our this form, right? And if user is not editing and normally adding, then we need to add. So for that we need to have different if conditions. So we'll say if editing node id, if this id, if it's true, which means user is editing the form. In that case we want to show user edit node, which means he is editing, right? So we'll say edit node. If that is not the case, which means user is adding, right? So we'll say add the new node. That's it. So we will display this heading, and after that we can display our input. So we will have an input. So this input will be for our title. So we'll allow user to add a title, which will be of type text, and we will connect it using our ng model to our template. So we'll use ng model and we'll bind it to our node title, okay, like this. and we will have a placeholder, and the placeholder we will call it node title, like this, okay, with a space. So this is for our input label, and we will have same something like this for our text input. So we will have a text area here, and we'll bind it to our node content property, which we have defined in our TS. Okay. Now whenever we want to do this, we need to either add or update our node, right? So here we will have a button, and the button, this button will say again based on what user is doing. So if this is true, then we will say user to call the button here update node, right? But if this is not true, then we wanna say that this should be called add node. So this button is there and it does this specific bit, but to call this button we need to have a click listener. So we'll add a click listener, and this will call actually our add or update node method which we created, right? After this we will have another button, and this button will only be called if user wants to cancel his changes, right? So we need to allow user to do that. So for that we'll have a ngIf, and ngIf we will say if he's editing, like only if he's editing and he want to revert his changes back, that time we can call this button. So we'll call this button cancel edit, okay? And for this button we will have a click listener. After this we will say it whenever the button is clicked, we want to call our cancel edit button which we created, this one. So that's it for our adding the form. So with this we'll be able to add new forms, okay? Great, so we are done with our adding the form. Okay, so last thing, we need to introduce our ng model change here. So whenever user writes a new search term and he wants to search for a specific node, we will trigger a method on ng on change. So whenever our ng model change, this one, if this is called, basically we will call this on search term change method, and we will trigger it with this event, okay? Now what we will do is, in this method we will introduce a behavior subject which will get triggered every time, and it will update our search term so that it can refetch our list. So in our TS file, first of all we will declare a behavior subject. So we will declare our behavior subject. We are using this behavior subject so that our search term can have the updated value and it can refetch our list. So we will say here private search term subject, and this will be coming from our behavior subject. So behavior subject, and this will be of type string, and initially it will be like a empty value, okay, like this, and this should be like a new behavior subject. So we are using this behavior subject so that our search term can become reactive. Currently it's not reactive, so in our method, this method which we have declared here on search term change, we'll declare this method, okay, here just beneath it, and here we'll say on search term change. And for this method what we will do is we will give this behavior subject value the updated search term, okay? So this method, it will take our new search term, right? Whatever we are writing in our HTML, we have passed it here, as you can see, as an event. So we'll write here new search term, okay? This will be of type string. So we'll make our search term, okay? This search term equals to this new search term. So we'll make sure it's in sync. So after this, we'll call our behavior subject. So we'll say this term subject, and we will call it next property, okay? And we'll pass our new search term. So that's it. So now after this, our list, this filtered nodes, this will get re-triggered, okay, and it will fetch our list depending on whatever we write as soon as our this method is called. So now we are actually done with the whole code. So inside our app config, we need to do some basic configuration in order to use our store and our persistence, okay. So in our app config file, we need to import our reducer file here. So we'll say import *s. Okay, so for our meta reducer config, we will use our constant key to sync. So this will be the key which we'll use to sync our app state, okay? So we'll say here, this will be basically from nodes dot our node feature key. Now if you remember, this node feature key is this nodes, okay? This one. Now what we will do is we will sync this with our local storage. So for that we will declare here a function, and we will say local storage sync reducer, okay? So it will sync our reducer with our local storage, and we will be able to maintain our persistence. So whenever our application load, we still have the nodes. So this will take our reducer, and this will be of type action reducer, okay, here, and here we will say this will be of type any, and here inside this we'll say this function will be of type, again action reducer of type any. Okay, like this. We'll open this. Okay, and here we need to return our local storage sink. Okay, so local storage sink we need to return. For that we need to install it using our npm. So we'll install that. Here we'll go, and with this, now I'll just remove this. We have got our local storage sink here, so we will import it here after our nodes. Here we'll say import, and we'll say local storage sink. Okay, and this will come from our ngrx local storage. Okay, so ngrx local storage. Okay, you see, now what we'll do is here, after inside the function we will return this local storage sink. Okay, now here we will return our local storage sink. So we'll say local storage sink, and you see this takes our config here. So here we will have our object, and inside the object we can return all the values. So one of them will be keys. So key will be this key to sync. Okay, so we are syncing basically, you see, our reducer with our local storage. And then we have like other properties, like whenever basically our application restarts, we want to read it from local storage. So we'll say rehydrate, we'll set it as true, and then we will have our storage. So we'll get it from our local storage. So window.local storage. Okay, this one like this. Okay, that's pretty much it. We can have one more option, which is set this as true, and that's it. Now after this we just need to pass our reducer here like this. So we have successfully defined our this local storage sink function. Now we need to declare our meta reducer. So we'll say meta reducers. Okay, here, and inside this we will have our local storage. So this will be constant, and here we'll have our local storage sink reducer, this one. Okay, so this is our only array of meta reducers for now. Okay, so now we have successfully deployed our meta reducer. We will take this and we'll put it here inside our object. So we'll put meta reducers, and now we have initialized our store using this meta reducer. Okay, so you see we have used this key to sync, which will connect all of the stuff. Now in our provide effect here, we will have an empty array, as currently we do not have any effect for now. Okay, so like this, we inside our provide store dev tool we have also initialized. So now you see with this new Angular setup, everything is initialized here. Okay, so now only thing we need to provide is our state. So we'll say provide state. You can see it's coming here, provide state, and inside this we will say here from nodes. So as you remember, we imported our reducer, so we'll say dot nodes feature key, and we will provide our from nodes dot node reducer. So this one. So we have provided our node reducer for this feature key, which is our key. Great. So we've also provided our state as well now. So our all of the store is available throughout our app. Okay, so we'll go into our CSS and we will just paste some styling here. You can also copy and paste this styling from the GitHub code, or you can just see it from the screen. I'll put the link for the whole CSS styling in my GitHub link. Okay, now I'll save the application and I'll do ngserve. Okay, so here I'll go and I'll do ngserve, and we can see our application in action, and you can see that our application is up and running. We can add a new node, so I can add a node called study, and I can say I will do it today, like anything, and you can add multiple nodes. Like, so you see right now our list is not refreshing. So what we can do is we can go into our TS file, and once we do our this method, which is add or update node, what we can do is every time we can call this reset form, right? So after this we can call this dot reset form. So what it will do is it will make the fields empty for us. So saving it and going back, writing a new title. So I'll say football will play tomorrow. Okay, another node, and you see the fields are empty now. So like this we can have like more title, like, you know, whatever stuff you wanna write, you can keep writing. So like this you can have more nodes. Title and content could be something, okay, whatever. And if you add a node, now you see we have got all the node, and if I refresh the app, you will see that the data is still there. None of the data goes away. And if I go here and if I want to edit a node, for example football, I'll edit it and I'll say football, and then I want to play volleyball. So I've changed the node and I'll say I want to play today. You see I've changed multiple fields, and if I click on update, it will update the node, make it empty, and you see the fields have been updated. And if I want to delete, I can just click on delete. It will ask me, and you see it's gone. as easy as that. And if we want to edit and then we decide, okay, no, we don't want to, and then we can just click on cancel and it's gone. Easy. So it's become again back like this. If you want to click on football, either we update or we delete, we cancel. So we don't want to cancel, like you can write whatever changes you want, okay, and if you click cancel, it should revert back, you see. So you see, we performed all the different operations, which is to create, update, delete, and even revert our changes back, but our whole nodes are working properly. We will also, okay, and we can also go on, and for example, if we had a lot of nodes, right, I'll just create some random nodes here. Okay, now if I try to search one of the thing like travel and I press enter, I see that it's not working. So let's go back to our code, and yes, we forgot to combine. So what do we need to do is we need to combine our this latest search from this search term subject into our previous nodes, and then we need to chain it with the pipe. So I'll show you how to do that. So this dot filter nodes will take this, and here what we will do is we will use our combine latest operator from ngrx. So I'll take all this bit, comment it down, okay, and here I'll again start it. So I'll say this dot filtered nodes, and we will combine like two latest properties. So we'll use combine latest, okay. So for this you need to take like this, and you need to take two properties. So one is our already we have is nodes observable, so we'll say nodes observable, this one, and the other one is our search term. So we'll take this dot search term object, this subject. So this one is coming as observable, so we'll say dot as observable, and then we will pipe it after this. So inside this, what we are doing is we are taking two observables, one is this, one is this, making it as observable, the behavior subject, and piping them. Once we do that, we can maybe wait for some time because we want user to write it down and then do a search. So we'll use our debounce time, wait for maybe 300 millisecond. After that, we can use distinct until change. So what it does, it only emits if the value is changed. Like if the user doesn't change the value, then it won't emit any event. So we'll use distinct until change like this. After that, we can say start with. So we do this to ensure that the initial emission for the combine latest. So when this combine latest is called in the beginning, then we have something. So that time we'll have like an empty string. So we'll start it with like this. And after this, what we can do is at this point we can pipe. So here we will pipe and we will map, and then we can get all the values. So the values which we are getting here is nodes, right, and our search term. So this will be nodes, okay, and our term. And then what we'll do is we can open our arrow bracket and we can write our logic, which is to filter the nodes. So this dot filter nodes, and we will send our nodes and our term. So that's it, and that should actually do the whole job what we were doing here. So once we do here like this and remove this, and if we save this now and go back to our application, and now if I search travel, you see that I do not have to do anything. Within 3 milliseconds it filtered out the list and gave me this, and if I remove this, we get back our original list. So that's it. We have actually completed all of the things mentioned, which is to create nodes, update nodes, even delete nodes, showing user different values depending on if they want to edit or if they want to add a node. And also we learn how to search the nodes. So filter the list and use behavior subject combining with combine latest and other RxJs operator. So if you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.